UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Are they extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers in origin, or are they simply a result of top-secret military projects, false flag alien invasion, PSYOP, drones, or other human-made aircraft? Join the discussion now on UAP Crossfire.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a brand new edition of UAP Crossfire. And I guess today is, as far as we all are concerned, the official end of summer because, hey, coming up on Monday, Labor Day. Good golly, Miss Molly, we're just about out of time for this year. And you may notice a little change in the hosts tonight. You know, when we started UAP Crossfire, we had 4 guys here to chew things up and kick them around. One of them decided that he couldn't do it anymore. He left. And normally it's the 3 of us. Commander Cobra, which you will see on my right here. Commander, how you doing, my friend? It's great to see you.
Sir. I'm doing great.
This way, yeah. And normally, our other esteemed co-host, Mr. Chris DePerno, retired police officer and the MUFON state director, would be here, but his wife has taken Chris on vacation. And it's my understanding they're sailing up north toward Canada. Now, why anybody would want to go up to Canada? Well, that's beyond me. But hey, I'm not married to the lady and she's taken him, so that's a great thing. But tonight it's just going to be Commander Cobra and myself, but we do have a very special show. Our guest is Mr. Robert Kiviat. You may or may not recognize Bob's name, but did you ever see something called The Alien Autopsy on Fox? Well, Bob was the executive producer on that. I actually had a chunk of that story myself, but he has done many, many things, going all the way back to things like Now It Can Be Told, a huge chunk of biography there. And I hadn't talked to Bob in a while. We've known each other now going on, good God, 33, 34 years. But recently I got in touch with Bob. We have some of the very same interest in this field of UFO, UAP. I mean, people today are calling it UAP. Personally, I think horseshit is horseshit is horseshit. I still prefer UFO, but I'll throw the UAP in there to make the Pentagon happy, and they're not happy with me anyway. But with that being said, Mr. Robert Kiviat, please join us now. And Bob, it's great seeing you. How the heck are you doing?
Great, Don. Good to see you again. It feels like just yesterday we were talking about things when I did come from New York. But we did that show. Now It Can Be Told, believe it or not, probably was one of the most investigative TV shows ever on TV. And I got a chance at that point to do something about Area 51 with UFOs, celebrities who had seen UFOs. Ronald Reagan wrote me a letter, literally, confirming his own not only belief in UFOs, but apologizing that he couldn't be part of the production we were doing. And he wanted to give an interview, but he was too busy. So that was one of the things that kind of, crystallized me before I came to LA. And then when I met Don, I went through Unsolved Mysteries. That was the show that brought me out here from New York. did a couple of big things for them, many things for them, but also it brought me to Encounters on Fox, where they kind of took me away from Unsolved Mysteries, sort of drafted me from them. And then it became natural to call Don up right away when I got to Encounters, because I had been reading about UFO magazine. I've been reading UFO magazine since I was in New York, and I knew UFO magazine, and Don and his wife Vicky were obviously a big part of the reason why I took UFOs. Yeah, Don, I'll be honest with you. It's like if you said my name, Robert, yeah, I'll turn around. Bob, I'll turn around. Robbie, I may not turn around, though an ex-wife calls me that. You say the word UAP, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I believe UAPs was a concoction of something that I think people like John Podesta and Hillary Clinton's campaign back in 2016 wanted to try to rejigger this, and they heard somewhere in the military parlance they called it UAPs, or unidentified aerial phenomena. Believe me, I talked to a lot of government people over the years, and I want to hear from our government-related individual today on the podcast today, or the streamcast. I don't believe the word UAP has any meaning at all. I think it was something that was concocted just to kind of change the dynamic, and by no means was it made to take the stigma off the word UFO, because UFO goes back to, believe it or not, the early 60s. Go to a movie. Anybody could go today. Go find the movie Fail Safe about nuclear war. Fail Safe, starring Henry Fonda, starring Larry Hagman. The guy was in Genie, yeah.
Yep.
Basically, Walter Matthau. And you see in this movie about nuclear nightmare where a mistake is made, and we unfortunately bomb Russia by accident, and we have to make it up to them by taking out New York. Yeah, that's right. We're going to take out New York to show.
Yep.
All right. But in that movie, when you go to the big war room, if you will, right? And Walter Matthau is giving a tour of the war room, and you see the war room, the whole thing take place, and an incursion of another aircraft comes in, or in this case, the Russian group. The word UFO comes in at the bottom of the screen. UFO detected. It's not an alien craft. It's an unidentified flying object that our radar systems are picking up. Why the blank will we need to change the word to UAP? Why? There's no reason. An unidentified flying object is still an unidentified object. An unidentified aerial phenomena implies nothing, because in England, the word phenomena isn't even a big deal. So the word phenomena tied to the word, the rest of it is it's a nightmare. I don't even know where that came from. But you know what? If we're going to get into it tonight like we should, let's talk about the individuals that were around Hillary Clinton at that time.
Well, before we do, Bob, I want to go back to something that occurred just a smidgen over 10 years ago. It was a special that you were the executive producer on. It ended up airing on the Sci-Fi Channel. It was called Aliens on the Moon, The Truth Revealed. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is that while I was the director of research for UFO Magazine back about 1990 or so, or 91, I started my broadcasting career in connection with UFO Magazine. I started broadcasting. I was broadcasting a show every week on the cable radio network, CRN.
UFOs Tonight?
Yes, UFOs Tonight, which went around the country. It was heard in Hawaii, Alaska, all across the 48 here, and it became a very popular show. But at that time, I was the only guy doing that. Now, of course, Art Bell was around, but in those days, he was still doing political talk on satellite radio. He had not yet gravitated to the UFO topic and phenomena topics.
Yeah, I didn't even know that. Yeah.
In some way, I think he ended up going into UFOs because of television journalist, broadcaster George Knapp, who had just a year or so previously broken the story on a guy by the name of Robert Lazar, who was purportedly, a scientific, talented guy that claimed he had worked on recovered alien craft that were being stored at Area 51, Site S4. But I don't want to go there. What I do want to do is talk about, I had two different shows on my program about lunar phenomena. And this put me on literally a 20 plus year research effort into finding out what is going on the moon. Because, ladies and gentlemen, there is something going on the moon, something that's been going on for God only knows how long. But Bob was one of the main producers that I knew. Now, I had worked with a lot of people in Hollywood, but Bob was one of the only people that I knew that truly was invested into the UFO topic. He had a hunger to find out exactly what in the world was going on. And we're going to talk about that today.
Still do.
But I started bugging him all the way back then. I said, Bob, we've got to do a show about, and I had two ideas. Number one, military and NASA UFO encounters.
Yep.
That was one show. And there was a lot of information that people were not aware of, both concerning NASA and our and other armed forces. The other thing was the moon. Now, I had some contacts that I was able to secure a sheaf of lunar photographs from JPL. I had a buddy, who was actually, I was a ham radio operator. I had a buddy that was a fellow ham. He lived in the area here. He was connected with some other ham people that happened to work at JPL. And as it turned out, JPL had an entire library of moon photographs that they had there. One of those guys grabbed a pile about like this of lunar photographs, brought them over to my friend. We ended up scanning all those photographs. Then he gave the pack back to his buddy, who put them back, and we started going through those. And we found some astounding photographs of what could only be artifacts. Now, one of the photographs I had that I discovered was of a huge pipe running through a lunar crater that you could follow it actually in the photograph, going out to an overhang, a cliff. It exited the cliff, and it had a very weird end on it. Now, I had saved that picture. I never showed it publicly to anyone for years until finally in 2014, Bob ended up getting the go-ahead to do a special on the Apollo anniversary with the moon mission and what in the heck was on the moon. Did, in fact, the astronauts see anything? Well, one thing I had discovered early on in my research was that when those astronauts went to the moon, they were carrying firearms, specifically 1911 45 caliber automatic pistols. Now, that sounds crazy at first sight, right? Crazy. When I heard that, I didn't believe it until I called up and started bugging the NASA public relations people. Finally, they admitted, well, yeah, they did have weapons on board. Why? Well, we always thought that if something happened when they were coming back from the moon and they ended up landing in a jungle or somewhere, they would have to have an ability to defend themselves. And I said, land in a jungle? When the hell are we landing in a jungle? We always land in the ocean. And of course, they had no comeback for that. But we ended up doing this thing, and one of the people that Bob was able to secure, and Bob, I've talked about this on this show. I don't think it really resonated when I told this story, but Buzz Aldrin, the second American military officer and NASA astronaut to step foot on the moon, along with Neil Armstrong, okay? Buzz Aldrin ended up on this show.
He didn't end up. I pulled him on the show. He didn't end up on the show.
Yeah. And here's the funny thing. I had some very provocative lunar photographs that I got originally from NASA. When Bob laid those photographs in front of Buzz, he violently turned his head away, refused to look at them, would not look at them, would not discuss his lunar adventure, wouldn't talk about it. The second man to ever land on the damn moon, and he didn't want to talk about it.
Well, yeah.
The only thing.
Yeah. Let me tell you the story though, because he may not have the full story exactly what happened in his condominium. We should tell you what happened there. I don't think you know.
Go ahead.
Exactly. Because we may not come back to the moon. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I want to make sure
go ahead.
I comment on what you're saying. First of all, let's be clear. Don found the photograph at JPL that became a big part of the show. And it does appear to show what appears to be a pipe, a huge, well, it would be more than a pipe. It would be something like a 20-foot circumference kind of, tunnel, if you will, maybe bigger than that. Maybe it's like the Holland Tunnel going through a crater. And then outside that crater, about maybe a couple of miles away, there appears to be something directly linear direction. And it appears to be sticking up, straight up, maybe 1,500 feet, maybe 2,000 feet, hard to tell. Some kind of a funnel is on top of it, so it looked very unnatural. And we did get JPL, a guy that looked into this for me. He did confirm. So, Don, don't worry about the paper image you gave me that day. That is an actual image that is in the archive at JPL and NASA. They looked at the area that Don found. They looked at the area where the funnel seems to be, as well as the pipe going through the crater, and they could never explain it. Their only possible explanation will be some kind of artifact in the photograph. But outside of any artifact, which they didn't think it was, it appears to be what it looks like. And he even made a little movie for me to show me. This JPL scientist made a little movie to show me what it would look like if you circle the area. So we were very clear, and we showed this to the public. We were very confident that JPL would never come back after the show aired and say, no. There's no doubt what Don found is a legitimate image in the archive to this day on the digital imagery they have. It has a number. It has an actual, because if you look at Don's image, there's an actual number there. You can see what that is, and we know what that is. So overall, there's a proof that we need to look at if NASA ever goes back to the moon properly with astronauts, and they literally get there, which I don't know if Artemis will ever get there. We'll talk about the Artemis mission today, hopefully. And Aliens on the Moon, Don, just so you know, the show is being seen by people every month. I continue to see a little revenue. I continue to see awareness of the show. And so we're trying to do a sequel to that show, which Sci-Fi Channel told me back in 2015, we would make a sequel 5 years later. Well, that executive who was in charge of that idea was fired. after 20 plus years at the channel, he was fired the first day. Listen, the first day of our production. I didn't know it at the time, but he was literally fired or moved to the chiller channel, which is your segue out pretty much, the day of my production beginning. We didn't know it. No one told me this. So I thought when I was giving him notes and sending me notes, he was still in charge at that channel. He wasn't really in charge anymore. So I had a nightmare experience where they didn't promote the show properly. They didn't get it out there properly. Maybe that was maybe not a coincidence for all we know. As Don shaking his head.
Sharknado got a lot of promo, didn't it? The Sharknado movies.
Right. Sharknado, right, exactly. Don's right. Sharknado was their big show. And you can see, if you see a version of this on the internet, my show exists to this day. I'm not going to say why or how, but it does legally exist on a platform where you can see it, and it actually shows you the airing Sci-Fi did, and Sharknado comes up and stuff. It's an awful, awful testament to how things went bad after that, from 2014 to 2017, and that entire New York Times debacle article that is probably the worst written piece of journalism. I think I grew up in New York. I can't imagine a New York Times article being filled with so much error and so much non-research bullshit that we should get into it tonight. And by the way, I hate to say it for the name of the show tonight, UAPs are a big part of the name. That article really birthed UAPs in the American culture, and I will do my best to try to take it out of the American culture, because that is the single worst article to affect the UFO field in probably decades, and we'll get into that. But we had just done something Don was very helpful about, that Aliens on the Moon show. Let me tell you how Buzz Aldrin got involved. We contacted Buzz Aldrin directly. We didn't go through the NASA Public Relations Department or Media Department in Washington, D.C. I knew very well who was in charge of things in New York. I know his name. I know him well. I would not go through him because he would be asking me for a treatment, blah, blah, blah. What is our documentary about? We never contacted them. We contacted Buzz Aldrin directly, just like we contacted Edgar Mitchell directly. They were both in Aliens on the Moon because we reached out directly as producers. We didn't go through NASA. We had a very little problem, no problems at all with Edgar Mitchell. We could interview him. We did that. It was fine. When I showed up for the interview with Buzz Aldrin in Beverly Hills, California, let me tell you how this was set up, Don, so everyone knows. First of all, he didn't want to be in the show, obviously. We were able to strike a deal at the very last minute. After all the weeks and months we spent communicating, we finally were able to strike a deal. I literally took it away from a producer that was trying to arrange it. I said, this guy's name is David. I said, David, move away. I took over that job responsibility directly as executive producer, and I contacted Buzz myself. And I was able to convince Buzz and his handler that as long as we did not ask Buzz controversial questions about, I guess they were implying about, did we go to the moon? Did we ever really go to the moon? All that nonsense that Buzz Sibrel, but whatever guy's name was, Sibrel did years ago. Did we go to the moon? Yeah, we went to the moon. As long as we didn't ask about that, we were fine. And also, he wanted to make sure that we asked about what might be on the monolith by Phobos, the moon of Mars, that Don has done a lot of research about. Phobos is a real controversial planetoid in our local area. It's one of the two moons of Mars. It's the strangest looking thing you've ever seen. It looks like a potato. It's just a ridiculous thing. And Buzz feels there is a monolith on that little potato-shaped moon that he believes could very well be artificial. That's right, an artificial alien structure on that moon. So as long as we asked him about that moon and that little structure on that moon, he was fine. So those are the parameters for the interview. When I get to the condominium, his handler comes out right away as we're setting up the cameras and says, Bob, I got to talk to you for a minute. Do you know that NASA called 3 times this morning? I said, really? Why would they? I didn't go through them. Well, she says they found out somehow that Buzz was going to be interviewed by my cameras, and they wanted to sort of coach him on what he could say and not say. So when I got to the condominium, Buzz says to me, first thing Buzz said was shocking. I go into the area they're putting makeup on him, getting ready for the interview. And he had his own people there to get him ready. And he says, Bob, I was just a bus driver. Those are the first words he ever said to me. Bob, I was just a bus driver. That's what he said to me, bus driver. Okay. So finally, we get to the interview. I have all the photographs that we want him to see, including Don's image. You're talking about the funnel and the pipe going through the crater and other things. And I had them all laid out nicely in his place. And I said, no. He said, I'm not going to look at those photos. And I said, well, I want to ask you about them on camera. Can we do that? He says, I'm not going to talk about those photos at all. So finally, when we got into the interview, I found a way to get into it. And finally, I started to ask him some questions about what if they had photographed things on the moon that were unexplainable, or if they were definitely things that were mysterious. And he is interviewed. You'll see him, and he says, I don't know. He says, ask the people that did the experiment, who means the people that made the camera. He wanted me to talk to the people that made the cameras that they used. If the cameras caught anything at all, artificial, alien, anything like that, he felt they're the ones who should be answering my questions. So here we are many years later, and I still feel Buzz is giving me the challenge to go talk to the people that make the cameras, and he's not going to answer it directly. So apparently that must have been what they told him. The part of the things they said, if they ask about.
Well, let me butt in real quickly for just a moment, Bob, because I want to get your reaction to this. When Armstrong and Collins and Aldrin came back, the first thing NASA did was put them in quarantine for a couple of weeks.
Right.
Now, seeing them at the first press conference after they came out of quarantine was like looking at three of the most depressed, beaten down men I've ever seen. I'll tell you what the hell they reminded me of. My Vietnam service. They looked like returning prisoners of goddamn war. That's how bad they look.
Can't deny that. Anybody who sees that footage has to say that.
Hey, here's the thing. I am asking you if you consider it possible that those guys in quarantine, because of what they may have witnessed, had their minds taken out and washed and then returned. Well, you know what I'm saying?
There are a lot of theories to why they look that way. One of the theories, you're right, Don, is that they had some kind of an hypnosis session in quarantine that would have either masked things they saw, removed things they saw, or whatever. But I can tell you this. We had every intention of doing a part 2 of Aliens on the Moon. We continue to work on it throughout the years. We now have a new distributor for Aliens on the Moon, so we're reviving it for a second round, if you will, and we're using it as a kind of like a progenitor of getting a series done called Artemis Moon. I have a poster I will send you, Don. We've already created the poster for the series. We were trying to sell the series last year in New York. We came pretty close to selling it. Actually, I should say 2022, toward 2022, 2023. And that series was going to use something that, Don, you're going to be flipped out about. We're going to use something called virtual production, where we literally can put our host into the photograph. Imagine walking up to the tunnel or the funnel that we're talking about, walking up to the pipe. Now, what I mean is we're going to create a digital image that we can then put our people in. And you can actually imagine training for the mission of going to the area where that pipe is going through the crater on the moon. And it can always be a training session for the astronauts. So we're developing that technology right now to do what's called virtual production. You can actually experience what it would be like to be standing near the funnel, near the crater where the pipe is, and other areas of the moon. And we think it's going to be a chance for the public to really see why the Artemis missions are really a bit of a joke right now. I don't know how much you know about the Artemis missions, Don, but the Artemis missions are a mystery unto themselves. They're claiming that we can't go back to the moon any other way because, and the way they're going to do it is so staggered. First, they're going to put, believe it or not, a gas station up there, up in space. They're going to have a gas station floating around, a satellite. And once that's up and running and fine, we'll then be ready to get people onto the moon. I'm like, what? Didn't we send the Saturn V rocket to the moon in 1969 and 68? Didn't we do that already? And then hold on. They talk about the craft having this special capsule that will be protecting the astronauts, I guess for the first time, from the Van Allen belt radiation. Now, wait a second. Talk about the Mandela effect that we were talking about before, which is a new documentary I have out now. Something's changed in our world, Don. Did we forget we went to the moon already? And Buzz Aldrin, for instance, is sitting there pretty healthy at 90-something, just got married to a 60-year-old young chick, and he's looking pretty good. He went to the Van Allen belt, so did Neil Armstrong, Collins, and many other astronauts. I don't know about you, Don, but they look pretty healthy, most of them up until they're very late in life. So what is this bullshit about the Van Allen belt being an issue for going to the moon and protecting? So I believe right now we're looking at a mystery, wrapped in a conundrum. What is going on here?
Well, I gotta break off here because Commander Cobra has been sitting there so patiently.
Come on,
Commander,
Cobra.
you probably have some things you want to say, some questions. Please take the floor, my friend.
Well, thank you, Don. Bob, it's a real treat to be on the show with you, and I love your work. I do want you to take a couple seconds and tell the audience what the executive producer does in these kinds of projects. I've got very limited time
in
the film industry, but for a lot of folks, they think they know what you do.
That's a great question. Yeah,
go ahead. Just give us a couple of turns on that because it's really critical.
It's just like Hollywood 101. It's very simple. In the film business, an executive producer, when you're making movies, more or less, when you're making big budget feature films with actors and all that stuff, you're looking at a money person. The executive producer is essentially a person raising money, having the money, knows where the money is, can get the thing funded, operates very much like a businessman. In television, the executive producer usually is the creative force behind it. Probably the person that found the story in the first place. Probably was the one who wrote the first treatment. Probably was a writer to begin with. An executive producer is very much the creative, visionary force for the project in television. And now what we call direct-to-streaming documentaries, very similar. A TV special like I've done many times for many networks, Fox and NBC primarily. They're looking at me as the executive producer like the writer of the story, as if I'm the one who knows the most, who's researched the most, who has the trust of the network. Very different than the movie business. The movie business, that guy's a money guy. In television and then Aliens on the Moon, Don was peppering me as a journalist for years to look into this. And finally, knowing Don's a journalist in his own right, I started to take it very seriously. I don't know if anyone knows this, and maybe Don doesn't know it either. When we pitched Alien Autopsy to the Fox network, it was going to be one episode of a series called The Supernatural Eye. We were going to take a very serious look, like CBS, where I come from. Now it can be told was produced in the CBS building. We kind of had breakfast with the people at 60 Minutes often. I'd be in the 9th floor of the building having a bagel and coffee. And who'd be on there with me? People from Leslie Stahl, people from 60 Minutes. So my vision was to create a 60 Minutes for phenomena and mystery television and have the same kind of journalistic rigor, same journalistic ethos, ethics, whatever. And so I pitched them a series called Supernatural Eye. The first episode was going to be something called the Alien Autopsy. Get that one, right? Just one episode of a series. Then they loved it so much, they said, let's just do Alien Autopsy and we'll see how it goes. Okay. My understanding was we could then go down the list of the things in my treatment for the series called Supernatural Eye. And guess what was next, Don? Structures on the Moon. That was going to be next after Alien Autopsy. I'm glad to show it to you anytime you want to see it. So that was the beginnings for me. So I finally got back to the moon with Don in 2014 after pitching that idea in 1995. Wow. That's the fact. Now, all the years Don and I talked about stories and stuff, it kept the moon thing going. And I'm so glad we got to the moon today, and I knew we would because Don has such a vested interest in it from being a great guy. And by the way, Don's a great interview on Aliens on the Moon. You got to watch it. So you can watch it on the Shout Factory website for another few years or so, and then it goes to a wider distribution again. This is what we called an evergreen. Most of my shows, and thank you for asking about what the executive producer does, my job as executive producer is I'm the guy behind the creative vision. I'm the guy who made the show. I'm the guy who kind of handmade the show in some ways with a staff of people, but I want to see that show come back. Right. Like a guy who wrote an article years ago or wrote a book years ago that needs to come back into the cultural lexicon. We need to start looking at the moon, areas of the moon, and also we need to get away from this ridiculous stuff that was foisted on us by the New York Times. And unfortunately, it led to your name being called the UAP show, which I got to believe if that article never came out, this would have been called UFOs, not UAPs. And we should get much more into this. It's a very serious issue. What happened with the New York Times? How does that relate to what we were doing a couple of years later with Aliens on the Moon? And why did it happen just 3 years later? Not even 2.5 years later, after Aliens on the Moon gets a lot of buzz around the world, then we end up with this debacle called FLIR, gimbal, and then if you want to really make pain occur in my body, Go Fast. Go Fast isn't going fast, boys. Go Fast is a balloon, probably, but whatever it is, it's going 40 miles an hour. And the arrogance of any news organization to have a Jerry McCorbell or some other clown like George Knapp or Corbell together say that that is an amazing video without doing any research at all is an abomination in journalism. Abomination. And by the way, FLIR and Go Fast have their same kind of very prosaic explanation. Nothing like you're hearing from these grifters. And we'll get into how this whole thing happened if you want.
Well, one of the other areas I wanted you to touch upon, and thank you for explaining that, because there's a really important, you have a very experienced eye, to use your term. I think if you step back, you look at it, you can clock all the things that are happening here. And I'm kind of leading us into the Mandela effect business, and I think we'll probably pick that up on the second part of it. And it is your next show that's coming out. But
it's out now. By the way, it's out on many streaming platforms now. Apple TV, Microsoft. It's all on all the big platforms.
Excellent. Then we definitely want to drive people to it, and then hopefully maybe before the end of the year you come back on when most of us are seeing it, and we can maybe push it with our audience.
Anytime you want me, I'm with you.
We'll pick that up. But I think you have that rare experience factor that lets you look at this and you can see there's something behind all the things that are rolling out. Now, you talked about the videos. When the first of the videos came out, I don't know Commander Fravor, but I worked very closely with people that were in his squadron, and I worked with people that knew him from his time on the same deployment. Squared away guy. I never heard him say anything to me that didn't sound like honest truth.
Can I ask you a question? I interrupt you?
Sure.
Do you know he released a video in 2007 on Above Top Secret website?
I didn't know that.
The FLIR video is a rerun.
Right.
It was out in 2007. It got absolutely no play because nobody gave any information of any credibility to it. There's several individuals that came forward around the time this whole New York Times thing broke. Nobody wanted to bother looking at it. The media needed a story.
Right.
Donald Trump was in office. Everybody was like looking at his Twitter every day. They needed a story that was fresh, that was different. And in comes this UAP story from the New York Times. David Fravor has a lot of splaining to do, like the Lucy show years ago. Which, by the way, that's another Mandela effect, by the way. Apparently, Ricky never said, you have a lot of splaining to do, Lucy. Okay, apparently. Believe it or not. So
Right.
What I'm saying to you is I know people want to defend Fravor. But the bottom line is Fravor is an enigma in himself. He goes from not even wanting any publicity to becoming the biggest media hound you ever saw in your life. I mean, showing up in Unidentified, a terrible show, by the way, filled with complete nonsense, non-provable baloney. And this guy, Lou Elizondo, running around like he's some kind of former military UFO guy. He worked with Bob Bigelow. He had a desk job at the Pentagon. He had nothing to do with anything called ATIP or ASWAP. By the way, ATIP was just a joke of a name made up by Harry Reid and a bunch of people trying to throw people off the track that they kind of bamboozled the Congress to allow this money to go to Bob Bigelow. It's such a travesty. I hate to break the news to you, but this is a travesty of journalism. It's not even a travesty. David Fravor should go public now and say, look, you know what? I released that video in 2007. I released it to a family member. This is kind of like I'm admitting it now. And then you got to get a hold of this Dietrich woman. I interviewed Alex Dietrich, who claims she was watching from 1,000 feet above Fravor, watching this event occur, allegedly with a thing moving around the water and creating some kind of disturbance in the water and then shooting off really fast. So I said to Alex Dietrich, I go, let me explain this to me, Commander Dietrich. She teaches now at the Naval Academy, by the way. Like, explain this to me. Why could it not be one of our own drones, something we're creating, testing you pilots on what you're doing during a training mission? And she goes, Bob, they would never have a blue-on-blue event. Really? There's been numerous blue-on-blue events to test our own abilities. So everything she said to me was falling like on the floor, like a dead whatever. And then I said, I wanted to ask her, don't you guys have cameras? How come nobody took a picture of any of that? If it was happening anywhere the time frame she said, there should have been photographs of some kind. Oh, wait a minute. They were on training missions with no cameras, no ordinances. What kind of training was it? A little fly around? I have no idea what's going on here regarding that Nimitz event, but I can tell you right now, I mean, I interviewed these people. I hate to say it. Kevin Day. I mean, I don't want to say anything that besmirches people's personal integrity, but I sat and had drinks with this guy in Laughlin, Nevada, with the other guy that sat literally till 2 a.m. with me at the bar. As a journalist, we check people out. We check them out thoroughly. I wouldn't be sitting there with my girlfriend sitting upstairs in a hotel in Laughlin, Nevada in 2019 at the bar with these two guys just for the hell of it. I had a drink with them pretty much to make sure I could figure out what's going on. And I don't know, guys, if you think these are very credible people coming out with a great UFO tale that's going to change the world, I got some things to tell you. Okay, so overall, I'm saying to you, if you think David Fravor is a credible guy, that's great. But the bad news is the evidence sucks. The provenance is abominable. He sends it from the ship to a family member, apparently, and then somehow it resurfaces with Hal Puthoff and Bob Bigelow. You don't have to dig too deep to find out what happened there. These are videos that Fravor knew, one at least, was in the archive. You go grab it. There's no discovery made here. Gimbal is absolutely the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. If you look at the way it's turning exactly the way the gimbal camera moves.
Right.
All you got to do is you don't need Mick West to do an analysis and come out, Mr. Debunker. All you got to do is take a FLIR camera, show how it notches, and compare that to the image you have there. Now, if aliens are moving just the way, or the Chinese or one of our drones or a plane is moving just the way a FLIR camera clicks, what's more likely? Murphy's Law. You know what I mean? I mean, it's more likely you just got something in the distance, probably an engine of a plane being caught by the FLIR camera, and the camera's trying to lock onto it, doing its usual thing. So I think the government doesn't care what the media does. The government's going to let this stuff play out. They don't care. I've always said to Don, and many people have said the same thing, there's no need for a government cover-up with UFOs or UAPs, if you want to call them that. The people in the UFO field, which are filled with grifters, liars, scammers, yes, with government connections. Oh, that's right. The John Alexanders of the world, the Kit Greens of the world, now the Gary Nolans of the world. Lou Elizondo is like small potatoes. This is a mouthpiece for bullshit. Somebody told Lou Elizondo, hey, quit your job, join the stock scheme called TTSA. You'll make a lot of money with us, man. And he gets up there and he starts talking to CNN. And I believe we have otherworldly people coming from other planets. Are you kidding me? Don and I have worked way too hard in this field, to educate people about what's true about numerous videos, numerous photographs. You don't need to resurrect Bob Lazar. You don't need to not even resurrect, just kill Skinwalker Ranch. This is a scary time in our world because you're right. Mandela effect in one way or another. It's a world we don't recognize. Don, do you recognize this world sometimes?
Nope.
And by the way, one last thing. When they write the report, Arrow writes a report. Before that, the Congressional Committee wrote something. They never mention the other 65 years of UFO activity. They just make like 2017 or 2004 and 2015 on both coasts of the United States. That's when UFOs first appeared on our planet. It's an insane period. So that's my little ramble. Sorry about that, but that's
no.
You mentioned David Fravor, I get ballistic.
Well, and it's good because you and I never have had a chance to talk before. I was one of those very original people that said, I'm pretty sure that the Tic Tac is ours. And when I heard the parts about statements on we would never blue on blue, 22 plus years in the military, I laugh. I laugh out loud when I hear something like that. Also, I thought another interesting part about it was the footage as that envelope started to expand, what was available to see.
Right.
All these amazing craft that were flying by. One of the scenes I had seen at a conference, because I did a lot of ISR work, a lot of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance work. One of the scenes was something that it was being shown because the backseater in a Hornet very adroitly, when he was moving the sensor around, was able to pick up, which is a UAV that was flying at low altitude at fairly not super high speed, but for a UAV, for a drone, quote unquote.
Why should you say that so everyone knows? An unmanned
aerial system.
Aerial vehicle system, right? Not an unidentified alien craft.
Right. No. It's just the Air Force got their nose out of joint when people would call them drones because they didn't think it sounds sexy enough. That's what the problem with UFO was. I'm kind of surprised that you're against UAP because as an executive producer, you're always looking, how to fluff it up, right? I mean, and not the bad term fluff. I'm not going that direction.
I hear you.
I know I should be very careful when I say that to two guys on the West Coast. Fluffing and all that.
Jimmy, not that he's a bastion of any kind of great intelligentsia or anything, but Jimmy Kimmel has said it over and over again to presidents, to Hillary Clinton to begin with. To him, it's always going to be UFOs.
Right.
To millions and millions, if not billions of people, you could say the word UAP all you want. They're going to say UFO. What are we changing it for?
I think that's what I was driving at. There's a reason that we're changing. There's a reason that previous to 2004 events are trying to fall into not discredit, but just ignorance. We're not going to talk about that because if you show linking history, one of the things I think you will show, and it goes back to your earlier remarks that you and Don were making, if there's no conspiracies, there's no coincidences either, or vice versa. If you can't have everything to be a coincidence and then tell me there's no conspiracy. If you look at our history, and I think you have probably tapped this pretty well, you're showing government intervention from the start in the late 40s when it really grips us, because we now go into mass communications by radio, leading to early television. And now you have this event that comes up. You see the transition from print media going into electronic media, and the government is there shepherding it all along. Now, all this information is on the net. You can't control what's on the net, so you fill the net with more info to help dilute what's going on. And now you go back and you start to reshape the story. And you start to eliminate the repeats of information that don't fit the narrative that you want. No one besides you, Don's obviously brought it up to me when we've talked on the show. There's such an expanse of time from the Nimitz event to when it breaks. And no one wants to say, well, why did it take so long for this to come out? I think you touched upon it. There's an occupant in the White House that we need to take some attention away from. We need something else to be in the arena of discussion. I'm not going to say the arena of ideas, because I think the arena of ideas died probably in the late 50s, early 60s. We pretty quickly went into what we're at. Mm-hmm. But I think you are pointing to my growing conclusion. The cat is out of the bag. So what do we do to try to keep it from people questioning what's going on? And I think that's all the other things that we're talking about that we're up against. Right. We are seeing so many things fall and peel away.
Well, I think that this is fascinating, what we've basically been hitting on tonight. But with all of this, at this point, it basically is suggesting maybe the whole UFO, UAP thing, well, quite frankly, is some happy horse shit.
It needs to be shot and taken down, literally. I hate to say it to what was just said, but I got to be honest with you, Don. I got to say for the record, the entire world has been bamboozled by a bunch of people connected to how. Let's say a very.
Wait, let me just finish. Let me finish my thought.
Yeah, there's nothing.
There is a core secret to this phenomenon.
Totally different thing.
I am totally 1 bazillion% convinced the phenomenon is real. There is a secret to it that they will go to the grave. The powers that be, to defend. Yeah, and it's surrounded by a special access program.
If it's an SAP, like you claim, the SAP people are sitting in a bunker somewhere, theoretically, hypothetically, laughing their head off that a bunch of clowns named Hal Puthoff, Kit Green, a few other people around them, with Podesta loosely connected through the initiative with TTSA, they created a cottage industry of bullshit. Has nothing to do with the UFO field that we've been looking at for decades and decades and decades. This is a totally separate, one-off, grifter, generated. Even George Knapp saw the opportunity. George Knapp went, you know what? Little young Jeremy Corbell, you want to resurrect my cases from the archive of buried material? You want to resurrect Skinwalker Ranch? You want to resurrect Bob Lazar? Go for it. And they put out these ridiculous, crappy documentaries that would never get the light of day on a TV show. This executive producer could tell you, no network, no streaming service of any credibility would have ever put these things out there. James Fox put out the biggest piece of shit ever called The Phenomenon, which really was the outtakes from 701, some ridiculous thing he was trying to grift for about, I guess, 8 years, asking people for money. Hey, I got to make this movie again. I got to make another movie. Every one of his movies, the same thing. It's like, I know what I saw, copied out of the blue, It's the same bullshit over and over again of people saying things. Now, look, I like people talking too, but you can't prove anything in a court of law or science with just talking. You've got to have evidence. I came to California with one goal in my network TV work, to literally show evidence to the public. If there's no evidence, I wouldn't touch it. Roswell, I never would have touched with a 10-foot pole if it wasn't for someone putting together a video film or whatever it was and claimed it was an alien autopsy from one of the creatures recovered at the alleged Roswell incident. If that wasn't the case, I never would have touched Roswell. These cases are too old to get into. They're hard to get any kind of evidence. So you're looking for evidence. Now, I'll tell you guys one thing. There's a video out right now, and I'll be glad to share it with other people. It's a low budget YouTube thing some guy did, likely from England by the accent I'm hearing. And he literally breaks apart the entire fraud I just told you about, from Hal Puthoff, Kit Green, leading to the New York Times article. All that was put together by Puthoff. His classic example before was the psychic power shit back in early 1970s. Yes, Ingo Schwann was an interesting guy. Yes, Uri Geller was an interesting guy. But what they did was they concocted millions of dollars, or better yet, concocted experiments that had nothing to do with Uri Geller or Ingo Schwann doing their remote viewing. It had a
guys 30 seconds before the break.
So what I'm saying to you is there's a lot of truth to what this individual put together in this YouTube video. And what he did was he told the fraud story, but then used my shows at Fox, literally, the footage I show throughout the years at my Fox specials, as evidence of a true mystery juxtaposed against this nonsense. It's an interesting video. I'll show it to you.
Well, we're going to have to pick this up on the other side. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight on UAP Crossfire, our very special guest.
A very calm show. Yes.
Our very special guest, Mr. Bob Kiviat, executive TV producer, with a list too long to go into now because we got to go to break. We'll be back on the other side. Stick around. And we are back with our guest, Mr. Robert Kiviat, of course, Commander Cobra, and yours truly for hour number 2. Now, look, Bob, a week or two back, I sent you a paper that I wrote on the disclosure thing. You wanted to get into this.
I think we did already. I think we did.
We're going to do it a little more. How about that?
We're in it. Let's get deeper into it.
My bottom line is, and I'm convinced of this, that there is something that is deeply, deeply troubling to the powers that be that deal with this phenomenon. And one of my theories, I guess you would say, is that if there's one group of visitors coming here from one place, there's more than one, probably multiple. And it's my suspicion, because of a couple of stories that I broke back in the day, that not all these characters get along with each other. I suspect that there has been, I guess you would have to say, some low intensity conflict going on within our solar system. This is my idea, okay? This is my theory. And if that's true, that, of course, would be one reason that they would not want that information to ever see the light of day.
Well,
now, you've been in this a long time, Bob. You've heard probably as many or maybe more crazy stories than I've heard in all those years. What is your take on that? Do you give credence to that?
Well, first of all, let's take a step back for a second. When you say they, okay, I came into this many, many years ago as a young producer, young writer, believing that there was probably a government cover-up. Now I tend to lean more toward, after dealing with the Ronald Reagans of the world to whatever limited degree, hearing the responses of a Bill Clinton and other people that looked into it as from a presidential point of view, even Obama. I believe there's something like Bill Clinton said in one of his trips around, I think it was in China at the time. I'm not sure. I'll have to check that. And he said there's a government above the government. Now we're getting into things that are a little bit like, beyond conspiracy. Now we're getting into things about, is our world being controlled by a banking cartel? Is our world being controlled by some other thing than what we think is our governments themselves? That's another level that I've come to the opinion that that's probably what we're looking at. We're looking at a mystery that is being controlled by a cabal of world controlling entities that generationally, they can, from generation to generation, move the ball up the field just the way they want to keep the population where they need to be controlled. Now, even the movie I just released called The Mandela Effect Phenomenon, one of the reasons why I focus so heavily on CERN and the CERN particle collider as possibly causing a dimensional shift that may have actually changed physical things in our reality, movie scenes, names of people, parts of the Bible, literally parts of the Bible, events. Maybe there's actually a different timeline merged together with our own timeline right now. One of the reasons why I discovered the Mandela effect maybe being caused by the CERN particle collider collisions was scientific papers I read that people were trying to propose the CERN experiments as a way to puncture through dimensional reality and see where UFOs may come from. That's right. Some of the scientists were proposing that we may be able to determine where UFOs come from another dimension. The likelihood that aliens are visiting this planet, it's a hell of a lot more likely they found a way to bend space-time than they literally came on a ship traveling at like whatever light years, It's much more likely that quantum physics, some kind of a physical understanding of our dimensional realities, have allowed visitation from other worlds to come here. So anyway, back to the point, I really believe the CERN particle collider, whether it calls the Mandela effect, at my movie, The Mandela Effect Phenomena, you can get anywhere now on streaming services. I believe it has a lot to do with the UFO reality, because I do believe, like I said, you had people like Stephen Hawking, before he died, saying, do not do the particle collisions at CERN. Don't do that. That may cause a black hole. That may cause all kinds of problems in our reality, which may have caused a Mandela effect. But I also believe there are many scientists that said, no, wait a minute. We could find out what's coming in to our dimensional reality. And some scientists have even said evil forces, demonic forces may be coming in through those portals, if you will. It's a crazy thing. When you read the CERN scientific papers and you read what they're saying, it's like a Twilight Zone and beyond. So I believe there's a lot to this. But like Don's saying, the idea that there's a special access program that controls the UFO field, UFO secret, I think you're probably right. But you don't need guys to come out and control it. You've got human greed come along. You've got these people, like I mentioned, and I'll say them again: Hal Puthoff, Kit Green, Bob Bigelow before he took a powder for a while. We don't know if he's coming back into it or not. George Knapp, people like James Fox, who put out some ridiculous movie, but other people got into it because the marketing company behind that movie, allegedly, according to what they told me, paid $200,000 to $300,000 for marketing that piece of crap. That put, we can't leave him out. I mean, Christopher Mellon giving a rare interview about how these videos were given to him in a parking lot at the Pentagon? Are you kidding me? If I would have brought that story to Fox years ago, Don, they would have thrown me out and said, never come back in here. No, but the media, and by the way, I heard the promo in the commercial. The media should never touch these subjects, because what happened was, when the New York Times wrote that article, everybody said, CNN, Fox News, all these fledgling channels and whatever they are, they figured the New York Times would have done their research. They would have made sure that story's right. No, they didn't check it, and they just kept repeating the same false story. false narrative. Lou Elizondo is a criminal. He's a fraud. He fraudulently spoke to Congress. He's literally done things that are illegal. And we don't do a damn thing about that because you know what? UFOs, they're just a small story. You know what? They're not a small story. They're a huge story, as you know. So what they did was they cheapened UFOs for their own grandizement, for their own individual goals. They sat in front of congressional people and lied through their teeth about their backgrounds, about their knowledge base of the material, about the provenance and origin of the material. You can't get more fraudulent than that. This in front of Congress. So what happened? Arrow wrote the final definitive paper on what it all meant. And you know what they said? I'll be as nice as I can. If you simplify what they're saying, we were approached by a bunch of bullshit artists that couldn't prove a damn thing they were claiming. And every time we asked them to come show their evidence, like this David Grush character, he couldn't provide anything. In fact, they were leaning on things that Hal Puthoff was telling them, because all you got to do is read Lou Elizondo's first few chapters of the ridiculous book he wrote, and he says, Hal Puthoff told me, Hal Puthoff told me that, Hal Puthoff told me that, Hal Puthoff told me that. You don't need me as an investigative journalist to tell you the story. But unfortunately, since it hasn't been done properly by the media at large, I'm going to have to be the one to do it. So that's the next big movie we plan to do. And it's going to be unscathing, but it will leave the UFO field on in perfect stead for any new things that come along, new moon shows, other shows about UFOs. We'll clear the air. We'll get rid of all this bullshit, and we'll call these people on the carpet, just like the head of Arrow, Sean Kirkpatrick, tried to do when he was leaving. He tried to tell everybody, listen, it's all BS. But nobody cared because you know what? It's a good story. But I'll tell you right now, the networks I worked for, they won't touch UFOs with a 10-foot pole now. They have told me in no uncertain terms it's been cheapened by low-level distribution, low-level analysis, low-level everything. And the viewers, by the way, are also not that interested anymore. What has that done? So it's killed the golden goose. Don't worry. We'll bring it back properly. We'll bring it back. Will?
Commander?
Bob, where's your confidence that you're going to be able to do this? I mean, I completely applaud.
We're already in negotiations to make the movie. Unfortunately, because one particular CIA scientist has not been willing to finalize the deal to come on camera, it held up this deal at least 14 months already. But we believe this one individual, as knowledgeable as he is about the grifters we're describing, you know, for years and years, he warned people like me, well, before me, and then, but when I met him, at least the relationship we formed, he's been telling people for years, these people that are claimed to be government, like connected people like Hal Puthoff and whatnot, they're just scamming people. So that doesn't mean UFOs aren't a real mystery, although this one individual claims they're not proof of alien visitation, these cases that we've talked about for years. Don and I put on television, Don's written about, talked about on podcasts. It doesn't mean those mysteries are not valid mysteries. But what it means is these people have usurped the public fascination with UFOs for their own financial and ego realities. So it's time to take that out. I don't care if a guy's 80 years old. I don't care if a guy's 70 years old. I don't care, whatever. The point is, you got to call a spade, and let's get it done. Let's move on.
Bob, just a quick follow-up.
Sure.
I want to make sure I'm trying to phrase it correctly, because I think, does it appear to you that these folks that you've encountered, the conclusions you've drawn, is the cabal at the center of this? Because I completely agree with you.
No, these are just off the cuff. They've done it before.
But is it to cover up their malfeasance? Do you think all the stuff that we're dealing with now is because they've controlled this message, whatever it is? They've controlled this information. They're
Who's
so
they?
deep down.
Who's
this cabal that knows the people that set up the access program, the people, the self-appointed bettors that know what is what and will not release it to the rest because for whatever reason, ranging from we're too immature and we would not understand it, and all civilization would grind to a halt, to information is power and you're going to do what we want. We're going to entertain you with all these other things that are going on. Do you think the folks that you're talking about, that you're dealing with, are kind of the useful cutouts to help keep this story?
Yeah,
skewed?
I don't think, just to separate terms for a minute, what I was implying before is, like Bill Clinton has said, and I guess Ronald Reagan and other people have sort of intimated, there's a group of people that control our world that are not governmental people.
Right.
They're probably in the banking cartel industry. They're probably at the highest levels of financial wealth. And that element has a world controlling hand on things. Now, you don't need anyone, if that hypothetical group or entity exists, they don't need any help in covering up the UFO field. The UFO field is filled with so much human cottage industry wanting individuals.
Right.
They create so much baloney that it confuses everybody. So what happened was, and I'll just go back to Don's opening for the show. When Aliens on the Moon came on, it was the first time anyone's ever put out these evidences like Don's funnel, the pipe, other areas of the moon, clearly looking to be somehow terraformed. There appears to be some unnatural linear nature. Clearly, as Carl Sagan said many years ago in an episode of The Cosmos called Blues for a Red Planet, if you see geometry on a planet or a planetoid, it's likely evidence of intelligent design. Now, we showed just a little of that in Aliens on the Moon. We showed some UFO footage as well. Yeah, we showed a ridiculous thing called the Apollo 20 thing because that was on the internet. And we want people to know we believe it's a fraud, but it shows people are interested in this idea of what's on the moon.
But I totally fought against
it's okay.
Shit
It was
of the alien Mona Lisa.
Okay.
What a crock of
Well,
shit.
Don, at the time, 70 million people were looking at it on the internet. So we felt that the executive at Sci-Fi who wanted it in, we gave it to him. It's fine. But the thing that I think more important after that is we were on the cusp of something happening with UFOs. We were getting somewhere. Then comes along this character. We don't know what started this guy's motivation, but Elizondo got in touch with Keene. And before you know it, or whoever got who involved, maybe connected all of them, that became the UFO narrative for 7 blanking years. Enough already. That's not the UFO mystery. That's just 3 videos or maybe 2. And if you really want to break it down, probably 1, you're talking about Fleer,
Sure.
that has any kind of credibility at all. And the credibility is so mired in confusion because it was released by a pilot, apparently, on the ship, Fravor, why he released it back in 2007, what it really represents, whatever. But that's not the UFO field. That's a brand new UAP-related New York Times offshoot story that has nothing to do with UFOs. Even though the people behind that ridiculous thing called the Phenomenon movie spent $200,000 to $300,000 to market something that probably had less than $40,000 of production value in it. But this guy runs around going, oh, we had $1 million in investment. No, you didn't. You took money from people. You lived off the money. You made a crappy piece of nothing that nobody could get out into the marketplace. And then during the pandemic, a distribution company saw the light. Hey, if we stick a UFO-related thing, playing up all this Lou Elizondo, Christopher Mellon stuff, man, we'll make a lot of money. And they did, because people are home. They can't watch anything else. They can't do anything but watch on their computers. They're all stuck inside with a pandemic. What a nightmare. So my job, being a journalist on this beat, as much as anybody, and maybe more than most, except for Don and Vicky, maybe you're the only ones, it's our job to bring this back into the cultural lexicon in the right way. and tell the Joe Rogans of the world, stop the bullshit. You like the Bob Lazar story. Oh, no one would ever lie that well. Bullshit. You're responsible. You're responsible to 7 million young guys watching your podcast every day. Be honorable. He ran around for years saying, we never went to the moon. Oh, and then finally, okay, I was wrong. We went to the moon. That's irresponsible. Irresponsible media, irresponsible Spotify, irresponsible everything. So it's time to bring it back to reality, guys. That's what I'm going to do.
Well, I'm all for it, Bob, and anything I can do to help.
Let's get to Don's paper, though. Don's paper was well done because he laid out the history from beginning, more or less, maybe not going back to the Bible, but almost, going back to the history of UFOs as we know it, from Kevin Arnold and the Roswell event, mainly, because it's the most modern day, area of UFOs. And then right to where we are. He did it very, very pragmatically. Unfortunately, when you got to the 2017 period, that's, in my opinion, that's not disclosure. That's false, fake disclosure for financial gain, for marketing something to the public. And the New York Times, as a kid who read the New York Times religiously with 2 other papers every day as a kid, three newspapers a day, maybe that's why I'm a decent writer. One of them was the New York Times, Newsday, and New York Post. 3 papers out of New York. That New York Times needs to be held to task, taken to task for what they did here. They released an article on their online site called Black Horrors and blah, 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 whatever they said. It was such a really good response on the online site. They figured, what the hell? We'll stick it into the newspaper on Sunday, and we'll stick it on the front page with 1 column inch, maybe 1.5 column inches, and a changed headline. And they stuck it in there just so they could call it a New York Times article, basically. Because the online site, I don't know if that's really the paper. You know what I mean? So as a New Yorker, in my blood always, in my heart, I'm embarrassed as a journalist. I'm embarrassed that would happen. But I guess the New York Times proved Donald Trump, of all people, to be proper, to be correct in some ways. If the New York Times could put an article together about UAPs like that, then what else are they badly researching? I don't know. It's a nightmare. 95% of everything written in that New York Times article is complete, fallacious bullshit, including the credentials of Al Puthoff, credentials of Llewellyn. What's the most important thing, Don, when you write an article, right? The facts of who people are, what's their background, what's their connection, what's their prior history dealing with a similar
and
issue?
as a former criminal investigator, that's first and foremost.
And when we
now,
get
look, I got something else I want to explore a little bit. This is something that when I first encountered it, I got to tell you, Bob, Commander Cobra, blew my mind. And I'm referring to the remote viewing program that the government, the DIA, the CIA, the NSA financed for 20 plus years until the CIA in the mid 90s said, well, we've shut that down. Now look,
I got to jump in, Don. I got to jump in. I hope the audience is enjoying this as much as I am, because I am looking at the 2 of you, the facial expressions when each one of you are talking. Absolutely, it's gold. It is absolute gold.
That's good.
When somebody's funny bone is hit, the absolute beauty that comes across the other face. When you're going down an alleyway that maybe the other person doesn't agree with, the messages that are being sent out. With that said, Don, I'm remote viewing right now. I'm back with you. I had to throw that in there because we got Genghis Khan who came into the chat room. Big thumbs up, enjoying the show, and I wanted to give a shout out to
great. I'm glad to
one of
hear
our
that.
super fans.
Good, Don, go.
Okay.
Remote viewing. Go ahead, Don. Remote viewing. Go.
Yeah. So anyway, for 20 years plus, actually, there must have been some benefit out of this because they were tossing $1 million plus a year into the program for over 20 years. Now,
Yeah, but
with that being said, I had the opportunity to meet and get to know, and hey, say what you want to about the guy. He blew my mind, Ingo Swann. And I called him a friend. Okay. And Swann initially gravitated to me because of my lunar research. And if you ever read his book, Penetration, you'll know why. Because he apparently had done a remote viewing program for some unknown entity, the way he described it, about the moon, and discovered apparently a lunar base on the other side of the moon, the rear of the moon. Now, believe it, don't believe it, whatever. But Swann was one of those guys, and hey, when I was a cop, when I was especially a detective, I had to be able to read people. Okay? A suspect, interviewing a suspect, interviewing a witness, whatever the case was. And usually, I got to say, my BS indicator is fairly on the money. I never detected any bullshit out of Swann. But when I was doing some investigation into this, especially when Swann, was contacted by SRI, by Kit Green, Putoff, okay, I discovered something that troubled me.
I hope so.
All of those people had connections.
Same people, though.
Church of Scientology.
Exactly. How can the same Scientologist, Don, be responsible for TTSA? I mean, give me a break. It's like TTSA and the psychic program not only are sisters and brothers, they're genetically like copycats, pretty much.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean, by the way, doesn't mean that the government wasn't concerned, that the Russians were spending money on psychic research. We had a couple of phenoms. There's no doubt remote viewers have dazzled people with some of their abilities. But Kit Green and Hal Putoff created a little cottage industry where that money was continually funneled through their, by the way, Stanford Research Institute has nothing to do with Stanford University. There is nothing connecting that, just so we're clear. SRI was utilized by people like Richard Hoagland and other people to add credibility to whatever research they were doing. So even though I believe you're right, Ingo Swann, fascinating guy, who we tried to come to the aliens on the moon, but he wouldn't be in the show. That was earlier, by the way. We tried to get it on 2008 and 9, you remember, and then Ingo died after that. But basically, I did speak to him in 2009 and asked him, would you be in the movie? And he laughed. He went, oh, Bob, no, I won't be in it. But at least we tried, Don. There's no doubt. I mentioned you, and we tried. Ingo was an enigma. I don't know about Uri Geller. I'm not going to go there. But there's no doubt that Ingo Swann, in remote viewing parlance, was an enigma. Where whoever came in after that, other names were bandied about, it was all additional to that grifting the government to show them evidence that psychic power was a useful tool for like hurting people, spying on your neighbor, whatever. And the person that ballyhooed that more than anybody was General Albert Stubblebine III, who was he was head of Army intelligence. He was known as a spoon bender. He'd have a spoon hanging up above his desk, trying to bend it with his mind. He literally would try to make clouds go away by pointing at the cloud. Here's a guy who might have been somewhat off the wall, and he's a main protagonist in the movie called The Men Who Stare at Goats that George Clooney is in. So you have to understand that the government, being a large body, whatever it is, they get bamboozled by a lot of people. But when you get bamboozled, and then the same people show up and bamboozle the UFO community, and the journalists of our world don't get the connection, they're the same exact people. I mean, what? So that's the kind of thing I'm saying, how the New York Times would have missed that connection. I would not be saying this tonight if it wasn't for them leaving out at least another 5 paragraphs. Should have been written. The New York Times could have easily covered Hal Puthoff, known for encouraging the government to spend millions of dollars at a place called SRI. They left all that out like it didn't even happen. So what is the government really involved with psychic power? They were interested in keeping up with the Russians, as you see in the movie called The Ministerial Coats. They wanted to make sure, the army wanted to make sure that the Russians weren't getting ahead of us in paranormal research. And $1 million a year, which is roughly the amount. So I did a big story for Geraldo Rivera, Now It Can Be Told. We had Stubblebine lined up because Ed Dames told me for months, Bob, if you get Geraldo to do a show about remote viewing, I assure you, General Stubblebine will be in the show. So when we finally got the cameras rolling, I waited for a call from General Stubblebine himself. He never called. Finally, he calls a few days before we start production. I run back to my desk. I hear he's on the line. Here's how the conversation goes. General Stubblebine, I'm so happy you got in touch with me. We cannot do a story about your new company called, you know what he called it? You know what he called this company? Well, I'm not going to get to that. SciTech. PSI Tech. I said, we can't do a story about your new company taking all your research out of the government and literally doing remote viewing for industry. That's what you're claiming. We can't do a story about your remote viewing for industry and government, whatever, private sector, without you in it. You've got to be in it. Ed Dames told me you'd be in it. And I wait. And I wait for about, no joke, a minute. And I said, General Stubblebine, are you there? He said, SciTech passes. I said, what? General Stubblebine, are you saying that means that you won't give an interview and your company passes on being involved? I'll say it again. SciTech passes. That was my communication with him. I went and told Geraldo and his people what was going on. They said, well, we're doing it anyway. We don't care what Ed Dames said. We don't care what he said. We're doing it anyway. And there was Geraldo standing in front of the episode going, Stubblebine psychic spoonbenders, because we were so taken aback by his lack of interest in being in the program. And then I had a guy giving me great research. And by the way, Don, you got to look into this yourself. I told you before. Tim Weiner was a top writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer. He wrote a scathing series of articles that won him the Pulitzer Prize at the Philadelphia Inquirer for the black budget program the government uses. It ended up being a book called Blank Check.
Yep.
And he profiles the entire story about Stubblebine. And he told me in many calls we had, at least 3 or 4 different calls, Tim said, Bob, I know what you're into. You've done UFO stuff. This is nothing more than a government being taken advantage of by people. But is there any evidence of psychic power? He said, I don't know. But the point is that's not the issue. The issue is people like UFOs. Sure, there's a UFO mystery. No one can deny there's a UFO mystery. UFOs are being seen in our skies on radar, whatever, for like decades and decades and decades. Pilots are seeing it. Astronauts are seeing it. It's a mystery we know. We don't need these clowns to come around from 2017 and bamboozle the New York Times into an article and ruin a mystery. And psychic power. Let me tell you something about psychic power too, Dom. So in doing the story with Geraldo, Now It Can Be Told, I went to a university. The book called Margins of Reality by Dr. Jean and Brenda Dunn is a definitive book on psychic power, human beings, and the evidence there is. Everyone should read this book called Margins of Reality. And sure enough, in their lab, we were there. You can test yourself with psychic ability. There is psychic ability. There is something real about psychic power. But whether or not it can be used to hurt your enemy, spy on your country that's your enemy, or better yet, kill someone by staring at them? Like in the why is it called the Menosteric Goats? The claim was that remote viewing could be used and psychic power could be used to stop the heart of a human being or stop the heart of a goat. That's why it's called the Menosteric Goats. So that movie George Clooney was in it's a parody. It's like a black comedy on the psychic warfare program you're talking about, Don. So I'm not saying there is no proof of psychic power, and I'm not saying Ingo Swann was not a real mystic who could do things that no one else can do or very few can do. But that program was another grift, a grift just like TTSA is a grift right now. By the way, TTSA is an absolute criminal operation, a stock scheme called an A+ stock regulation abuse that because of the congressional issues, it can't really be prosecuted yet as a crime. But there is no doubt that TTSA is a stock scheme. And the people that were involved in forming that were the stock scheme culprits. And what am I, frontline over here? I mean, talking about PBS earlier. What do I have to step out of phenomena reporting and UFO reporting and Mandela Effect reporting and be a straight journalist for a bit? Yes. The documentary that we're going to make is going to be a little bit more like Frontline than Alien Autopsy, okay? It'll be a lot more about what's really going on and set the UFO mystery back on its head properly, okay? There are definite videos that people have never seen that make the thing called Gimbal, Go Fast, and FLIR look like a comedy that we spent that much time talking about, a 20-second video, a 14-second video, and I don't even know what Go Fast is, like a 3-second video. It's ridiculous. So you guys tell me, you're UFO experts, you're UAP people. Do you not see this reality as blatantly as my staff does? It's almost like a joke. Almost a joke.
Well, I think it's the intentional misdirection that's driving it. And I think you've tapped upon a really important part of it. There's a lot of money to be made on the way up and on the way down.
Like anything else, you get a moment in time, you can exploit it. This guy, James Fox, is counting his money. He's a hack. This is a guy who couldn't get a deal with a network or a respectable outfit to save his life. But
I got a question for you,
that
Bob.
thing made a lot of money, guys. If you knew how much money that thing made, Phenomenon, according to the distributor that told me, you fall off your chair.
Bob DeLong, Tom DeLong.
Innocent idiot.
Okay, how in the hell did a band member from Blink 182 get tied up with Elizondo, put off the guy from the Skunk Works? Okay, how did that happen?
Did you read the weekly?
When I heard that, I got to tell you, I damn near fell off my chair laughing.
It's an easy mystery to solve, Don. You had Tom DeLong on his own. He wants to be a UFO researcher when he's not playing whatever music you want to call that music. Okay, it's okay. 1 or 2 songs are okay, but I'm not a big fan of that band in any way, Blink 182. Marginal talent and a guitarist, marginal talent as a singer, okay? But he made it in music, no doubt. He wants to be into UFOs. He made that clear for years. There's a video of him. I hate to say it. It's a video that we're going to probably show in our documentary, and I'll be glad to send it to you, Don, to see. It's him talking, and he looks a little bit like, I hate to say it, he's got the signs of some abuse, chemical abuse. It's him talking about how he wants to be a UFO researcher, standing by these books and stuff from years ago. He wanted to be this guy, so he contacted anybody he could using his celebrity. And he got in touch with John Podesta. And he got in touch with a few people in the military. And here's where the story gets interesting. Why would people in that world give this guy the time of day? Maybe they saw him coming and they said, you know what? We can milk this thing a little bit. Guys from Lockheed got involved in TTSA, want to be UFO researchers, like I guess what Lou Elizondo really is. He wants to be a UFO researcher. He lied about his involvement with the government, but he wants to be a UFO researcher, I guess. These people got involved with DeLong, numerous different backgrounds, and they launched this ridiculous stock scheme called TTSA. Now, Did some people in the government help him? Yes. If you go back to the WikiLeaks documents that were released with the WikiLeaks dump, you can see DeLong communicating to Puthoff and others. The reason we know this is because Podesta was hacked. Podesta's emails lead us right to, as you'll see in our movie, lead us right to the answer you want. Where did Podesta get in? How did Podesta get involved? This guy tried to reach out to the former chief of staff for Obama and he was involved with Clinton. So these are the kind of people. I think he was chief of staff for Clinton, and what was he for Obama? I don't know, one or two different roles. I have to check that. But he had roles with Obama and prior to Clinton. Don't forget, John Podesta volunteered in 2002 with his brother, another wild guy, to be the promoter of that movie, that show years ago called Taken by Sci-Fi Channel. Barry Diller got behind a $40 million alien abduction, extravaganza that basically was John Podesta and his brother promoting it for the Sci-Fi Channel when he left the government for a little while. So all I know is that Podesta is the link between all that tomfoolery I'm describing to you. Podesta might be an innocent schnook who believes this stuff, but when you start getting into Podesta, you start seeing some really wacky stuff. He's involved in some sort of like spirit cooking. He's involved in all kinds of weird stuff with people with cannibalism. His brother has effigies made to Jeffrey Dahmer. Wait till you see this documentary, Don. Wait till you see where we're going with this. It's pretty freaky.
Invest in some Kevlar, Kiviat.
Yeah.
Invest in some Kevlar.
Sounds like people are going to be taking shots, but you know what? At some point, Don, you got to realize it's not what's the word? Your granddaddy's UFO thing. This is getting real now. If you believe in the UFO mystery being something you want my kids to know and my grandkids to know and my great-grandkids to know and understand and maybe solve this mystery, we got to do something about it. It's getting weird now, So that's what I feel. But anyway, I've said a lot already. It's not the first time I've kind of espoused some of this stuff. No. But I want people to start to get ready for it. Get ready.
A slight askew to Bob. I don't want to lose this.
What?
Describe your background for the audience. We didn't get a chance to what you have
no
there.
Problem. No problem. I was the editor of my college paper at a big state school, SUNY Brockport, New York. I was motivated to go into journalism. I interviewed with Democrat Chronicle. I interviewed with the two top professors of mine in journalism school that were working for a brand new paper called the USA Today. And I turned down a job to work at USA Today pretty much. I didn't get the job offer, but I was moving toward that direction when I realized I had a calling to do other things in New York City. I went through a period of time developing some of the high-end imaging tools you use today to, retouch photographs and do all your things with Google Pixel and all that stuff. I was involved in the early days of photo manipulation on Madison Avenue, doing what's called photographic digital retouching and things like that to photos. Yep. One day I realized, because my dad was one of the leaders in that, I realized if you could fake a photo with digital imagery, how could you prove UFOs were ever real or not or anything like that? So it motivated me to get back to my journalism days. I ended up taking a job at Unsolved Mysteries after Now It Can Be Told hired me on the spot because of my writing I was doing for that. I was doing writing. They loved what I wrote. I wrote an article for Omni magazine, a big science magazine.
Missed that magazine.
Omni. Omni. You know Omni? You remember Omni?
Oh, yeah. I'm old enough to know Omni.
I wrote a cover article as a young guy about the face on Mars. NASA had never really spoke about the face on Mars. That led me to Don later on about the structures on the moon. So they had a little bit of a training ground on Sidonia, Richard Hoagland, all those characters, some great scientists, some not so great scientists. We'll get to that some other time. And then it all led me to the show Now Can We Told with Geraldo Rivera. Then Unsolved Mysteries found out about me, had some of the highest rated crime and phenomena episodes for Unsolved Mysteries ever. I'm proud to say that in 2 years there, I had some of the highest ratings for both some very high-end criminal cases and some of the greatest phenomena, UFO, and other related stories of the unexplained. And then Fox Network found out about me. And I pitched them that show I told you about called Supernatural Eye. And they said, alien autopsy, we love that. we'll get back to the other things. The bad news is they never wanted to go back to the other things too much because Chris Carter, who had the X-Files on the Fox network, he told them, the executives at Fox, don't give Bob Kiviat and his company too many specials about UFOs and other mysteries because it cheapens my show. So
Really?
Fiction, right? Fiction. And tell Chris Carter, call me up. Because Chris denied it, never really to me, but people, and then finally some staff members, a good friend of mine was one of his top producers who actually formulated the Coveney character a little bit about me. There's a book out now called Cue the Sun by Emily Nussbaum. And the book profiles my Fox experience, describes what I was doing at Fox, talks about my days at Fox. And I think it says one good thing about me, I think, that I'm trying to get to the truth of all these things. And somehow other people have conflated that to be something else. But it's really about truth. And that's my whole thing. It's about truth. And if Don says I got to wear Kevlar because I'm pushing back on the fraudsters that are trying to take a mystery and make it into poo-poo bullshit, yeah, okay, I guess I got to take that on. What can I tell you? It's got to be done.
Well, I appreciate the.
You know what? Speaking of Chris Carter, this is something about that guy that has always pissed me off. And of course, I just recently on Facebook put up a meme about you're an adult if, and one of the things says you're always annoyed. Well, that's me. Okay, that's me. But Carter, there used to be a series of events out here in LA called UFO Expo West.
Yep, it became X-Files West. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and UFO Magazine, we would always be present at that.
Yeah, I know.
Take our magazines down there, people would buy them and what have you. And I didn't know who the guy was. He looked like a freaking surfer.
That's Carter.
But this guy and somebody else would come through. They'd always stop at our table and pick out a shitload of UFO magazines, buy them, and take off. Well, he was doing research because they were getting ready to go on the air with the X-Files.
Right.
So anyway, Bob tells me, well, one of my best friends from New York is one of his producers. I said, no kidding. So I started angling to get this guy to come on I'm not going to mention his name, Bob.
You can tell
him to come on.
Oh, Howard, it's fine. I'll tell you how Howard actually literally took the job because he came to me. He was here living in LA before I came here. He helped motivate me to write the article about the face on Mars, actually. And he's my writing friend. He's a guy in ninth grade. We were in the same English class. We were best friends, And he literally came to Unsolved Mysteries one day and left with my files under his arms. Several of those files became X-Files stories. Howard was the champion for me. Each time when Alien Autopsy was greenlit, he went to his boss, Chris Carter, and said, Bobby wants me, call me Bobby because we were little boys together, right? Bobby wants me to help him write this Alien Autopsy documentary. And Chris Carter put the kibosh on Howard and says, no, you can't. But he kept my outline. He kept my treatment. So, but Howard calls it, Bob, bad news. I can't work on it with you. And here's other bad news. Chris has got your treatment. And I said, well, get it back from him. He said, well, he read it already. Chris literally told people that UFOs were not the story for the X-Files. Like the X-Files was not a UFO series. For 3 years, that's what they were. 3 years of UFOs, mostly about UFOs. And Time TV Guide called it a UFO series. Carter wanted to believe he was the greatest maker of entertainment. UFOs are just an aside. Meanwhile, every one of his other series failed, but the X-Files stayed as a UFO-related series for many years. Because
I tried to get that son of a bitch on my radio show.
Howard wasn't him.
Both of them.
Well, Howard may do this show.
I wasn't important enough for those guys.
Well, things have changed, Don. Things have changed. A lot of things have changed. And one thing has changed is he's no longer working for Fox. He's a friend of mine. We had breakfast this last holiday period. And I think we will see something happen now where people will realize their interest in UFOs and the X-Files was joined together. Then when they went off into La La Land and some other stories and other things, the ratings started to go down. And overall, people lost what is the show? So I really believe there's a new renaissance coming of interest in this topic, but it requires a lot of different things. And you're right, Don. One of those things is, and my publicist will be involved, you'll be hearing more about this, we're going to be talking much more in detail about the things we're talking about today. So I'm kind of launching it with you, Don. This is the main thing. We're coming back home again. We're launching it with you.
That's outstanding.
We'll see.
I'm telling you
We'll
now.
see.
Yeah. So
Bob, what is that background picture?
Oh, this is just the Mandela effect poster that we created. That
Mandela effect. So
Yeah.
we haven't had Mandela effect from the first hour because we talked about the first hour, but we need to tell the audience.
Can I at least, Don, is it okay to branch out here a little bit?
Well,
Absolutely.
you don't need to check with Don.
Well,
Cobra's got a little sachet here. I asked you the question.
No, I know you probably rule over Don, but I know I'm come.
Please. On my best days, don't I wish?
That's why I was being very facetious.
I didn't know that. You originally being from New York.
Yeah,
is sarcasm another one of your skills as well?
Well, hold on. All kidding aside, I can see your role, sir. I do. But I do want to make sure on a narrative level, on a content level, I didn't want to take us away from.
No, that's fine.
It's really important.
Take it away.
It's really important that we get.
So what
this
happened
out.
was about 6 years ago when I saw this, even before this debacle occurred with the New York Times and the UAP movement, or whatever you want to call it. I was looking at things that were a little bit different because I had just done Aliens on the Moon. And I knew I had to wait a little while for new things. And I was taken aback by how many millions of views on YouTube there were on this thing called the Mandela effect. And I looked into it and I said, holy crap, there are a few things that I relate to too. For instance, there were things being said on the internet that people believe movies had changed, scenes from like Star Wars where Darth Vader says, Luke, I am your father. That never happened. And I'm like, what do you mean never happened? I saw the movie. And so when you start realizing that things in our culture and in our world, the fabric of society, things have changed. Movie scenes like that scene in that movie, Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. No, now you see the character at the beginning of the movie played by Kevin Costner. If you build it, he will come. He will come? What? If you would have said the beginning of that movie, he will come, people think it's God. They don't know what they're talking. It's they will come. Now, the players came. Now, he could be a few other ways to construe that, but we show evidence. We show people saying it and remembering it that way at the time. So we show in our movie, the Mandela effect phenomenon, that there's residual evidence in this timeline that we live in right now, that at one time these things were one thing, but now they're not. And what would have changed it? For instance, we may even see a crossover that some things from this timeline are from a different place, and then this timeline's mixed together with two different realities. Now, one thing we noticed in our research is the CERN particle collider and the quantum computer. These two things, these two endeavors, if you will, or creations, claim their goal is to take a piece of one dimension, piece of information, and bring it into this dimension, and vice versa. So we're taking those scientists at their word, and we're finding evidence in our movie. You'll see that something happened. Something's rotten in Denmark. Something actually occurred where we don't know when. It could have happened when the particle collider started. It could have nothing to do with the CERN particle collider, but it sure looks like synchronicity. Something's going on. And in our movie, we'll show all the evidence that something happened, something changed.
So, Bob, what do you think the impact is on the UFO story with the Mandela effect? What do you think?
I think I said it off camera before. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I want to make a quick remark about off camera. I have so much fun when we were getting ready to set the show up tonight with you and Don.
Yeah.
But have you ever seen MST 3000? That crazy television show?
Oh yeah, those like characters and stuff. Yeah.
But do you remember the opening where the alarm goes off and the robots and Mike or whoever is the guy that's in orbit, they all run to get into the theater?
Yeah.
That's what it kind of felt like when we opened the show tonight. Beep, beep, beep. And, everybody's wanting to get to the theater.
I love it. Anyway, to answer what you're saying, the Mandela effect connection to UFOs is direct. When I first looked into the Mandela effect, I was taken aback by a paper I read where one of the scientists, a proponent of the Mandela effect particle collision experiments, said, and we could maybe find out where UFOs are coming from. Because if UFOs are coming from distant space, it's unlikely. If they're coming from a dimensional difference than we are, that would make more sense. So maybe there's a way we can actually punch through this dimension and find out what dimension they're coming from. And when I heard that, I started to really dig into the research. So at the end of the day, I really believe there's a connection between UFOs or UAPs and possibly.
Right. My last question on this line for the Tonight Show. We're going to have a million more questions next time we get together. Do you think our UFO, UAP, alien visitors are the ones that are imposing the Mandela effect, that they are doing it?
Well, we definitely we posited that real briefly in our conclusion. It could be aliens. One of our experts said it could be demonic forces. It could be God. We don't know, but don't forget, if you read the Bible, like I've done some shows mentioning the Bible, I do believe that the Old Testament and New Testament talk about signs at the end.
Yep.
And I don't know, Mandela effect, when we were done with it, my staff and I, we were like, that may be a sign of the end. But I don't know. I don't want to be a doom and gloom guy. I really believe you got to be positive and you got to keep a positive attitude. So,
I'm going to say this to you because I think you appreciate it. When you look at John and Revelations and you talk about the angel breaking a seal and things happening, it sure has a Mandela effect kind of breakout when you read those words and you hear them.
And Don, because I want to give Don the floor at the end here, I guess we'll get toward the end. Don, you bring up your paper, the disclosure paper. You mentioned Grant Cameron. Grant Cameron was a UFO researcher when we were doing our shows back at Fox and even the NBC UFO Universal Sci-Fi NBC show, the Aliens on the Moon. We were looking very carefully at what was I just saying? I lost my train there. We were looking at we're looking at Grant Cameron's papers he wrote about presidents and UFOs. Grant Cameron was known back in the day as the expert on presidential UFOs. UFOs and presidents. He is now a big believer in portals, and our portals are opening up. And one thing about the Mandela effect is the idea that opening up dimensional portals. Right. So I don't know. I thought Grant was out in deep left field at one point, but who knows? I don't know. Grant Cameron seems to have really kind of bitten the apple for. We're living in dimensional shifting and paranormal, blah, blah, blah. So, Don, I don't know. The UFO field has changed quite a bit.
Yes, it has. And believe it or not, we are down to less than 2 minutes with this broadcast. I got to tell you,
a favor? I'd like to do
this.
My publicist will contact you. We're going to come out with, hopefully I won't need the Kevlar like you said, but we're going to be coming out with a Kevlar-inducing maybe lead, and we're going to be taking on all the players I mentioned. A little bit like Michael Moore years ago. I'm not a big lover of Michael Moore, one or the other, but there's one thing about his style. He'd scream up to General Motors, come down and talk. We're going to be asking people to talk to us, like the editors of the New York Times, CNN, Rogan's people. We want to understand, why would you run with a story that conflates bullshit upon bullshit when there's a real mystery out there? There's a real mystery. You don't need that baloney to cover a mystery. And
of course you would bring that up with 30 seconds to go, Bob.
This is to get back on the show. I want him back on the show.
Yeah. Where can we get more of your material, Bob? Quickly.
Let's start with, before we get to the UFOs or the music thing I'm doing now, whatever it may be, the Mandela Effect Phenomenon. That's the documentary. All you got to do is put into your phone the Mandela Effect Phenomenon. It'll give you your platform you want to use, Apple TV, Microsoft, a whole bunch of other ones. Plenty of digital platforms. You can get it for $3-4.99. I love your feedback. Contact me, contact us, you guys, let us know. But I really want to.
Okay, guys, that's unfortunately that's it for tonight.
That's the one.
Bob, as
Bye, guys.
always, fantastic.
Thank you.
Stick around a minute. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll see what's coming up next week. Monday is Labor Day, so we've got to figure out if our co-host Chris is going to be back or not. But in the meantime, have a great Labor Day. Commander Cobra, Bob Kiviat, thank
Thanks,
you
guys.
both.
Thank you.
And we'll be back.